And welcome everyone today who is in attendance. Today will be, I believe, the final iteration of the How Can I Help Stress Reduction Strategy for Use with Students webinar. This final part will be presented by myself. Hello, for those of you who have never seen me before, my name is Mike Carasillo. I am one of the psychological interns that work for State Center Community College District this year. And we are going to be representing psych services in a presentation about stress within students today, as well as focusing in on stress with faculty. And so we're going to be talking about a variety of different stressors, both in the student body as well as stressors that can be experienced through faculty. We're going to be reviewing some data, some statistics, and then we're going to talk a bit today about on the ground practical interventions that can be utilized both internally for ourselves and externally when we are stressed or experiencing and dealing with stressful situations. And so we're going to kind of go through this at a pretty steady pace. Again, if you have any questions, there is the Q&A option here and the chat has been enabled. So please feel free to use these things as you see fit. And at the end, we will be handling any and all Q&As. So to start off today, we're going to be talking about student stressors, what's going on, and why is there so much anxiety and stress that currently exists in this on campus. So a recent survey was conducted in 2020 that really broke down how stressed students are. And clearly, none of these numbers are designed to total to 100. There was just a massive survey, and people were able to sort of check boxes. But to give you a very interesting breakdown of what college students are reporting, about 70% say schoolwork stresses them out, over 65% are concerned with their money and finances. 69% are stressed over future goals, especially continuing education and college. This, especially at a community college level, this is an extremely important piece because students are planning their futures, planning where they're going to attend maybe a four-year institution. And there are a lot of just confusion and limitations and expectations on our students that cause this level of stress. And then also 39% experience or report stress related to eating struggles. And so I always like to include a little bit when we talk about stress, talking about eating and appetite, because this 39% really reflects students' physical changes when it comes to stress. We see a lot of people who have sort of mental barriers when it comes to stress, but we often don't recognize the physical changes the body undergoes. And so, in many cases, students who are extremely stressed can experience loss of appetite, can experience coping through the use of food, so overeating. And these sort of stresses on the body, both in both directions, only increase the stress load and ultimately the anxiety of our students. And so these are things to sort of note very keenly as we talk and we explore what is going on with our students and even what is going on with ourselves. And so when we look again at what is actually causing some of the stress and really a lot of the anxiety that the student body is experiencing, a whole survey from MediaAlertHelp.org broke it down into four key pieces. This does add up to 100. And so 46% of students reported that their primary source of anxiety and stress was workload. 28% identified people issues or dealing with classmates or social situations. 20% reported juggling work and or personal lives, and 6% sort of reported this lack of job security or future-oriented stress. And I really like the breakdown here as an example of all the different things that college students are going with, especially in a community college setting where students may not be full-time. They may be part-time. I reflect back to the financial issues that we spoke of just a moment ago. Students are going to be working, they're going to be juggling social life, self-care, and academia. And in many cases, students don't know how to do that. And so they will overload themselves to the point where they can't find a single minute of a day which they can't have dedicated to something else, especially if that's not themselves or their self-care. And so as we talk and as we go through the presentation, I would like everyone to sort of keep these numbers in mind, specifically the workload number, because this is something that students do to themselves and oftentimes is not something that we as professors, as faculty, as helpers ever fully comprehend unless we ask about. And so we'll keep these numbers in mind as we go through. And the next few slides, we'll be talking a little bit more about mental health statistics. Now, these are numbers and data that has been addressed before in previous presentations, and so I'm not going to spend a long time on them today. I'm just going to go over them briefly. If you want more information, please, I encourage you to watch the previous segments of this webinar series where we talk about these numbers a little bit more in depth. But mental health issues are prevalent among young adults, sometimes often referred to really as the anxious generation, where anxiety and stress has sort of peaked. Um, we have almost 40% of students in college experiencing mental health issues that are significantly impacting their performance. This is worse grades. This is poorer social skills, especially coming off the back of COVID-19. A lot of this stuff is kind of exploding in its prevalency. When we're looking at age, half of all mental health issues begin around age 14 and 75% by age 24. And so really, we're talking 3 years after they're 14, they're 17, they're 18, they're starting to come to college, all the way up to 24, which I believe is the bulk of individuals who are students at the school level, are really in the throes of these struggles. And we have to be aware of that. 67% of people 18 to 24 years old with anxiety or depression do not seek treatment. This is one of the most important takeaways from a lot of the mental health statistics that come out from research nowadays, is that people just aren't seeking treatment, whether they don't know how to access it, whether they don't believe in it, or whether they just feel alone and isolated. One of the biggest things that we can do as professionals is to help and be present and basically have the idea that students can come to us for advice and guidance because they may not have that advice, guidance, or direction in their daily lives. This is a diagram that I personally do really enjoy, and I always like including it into any presentation on anxiety because it shows and demonstrates how anxiety is beneficial and detrimental to individuals of all ages. And so I won't bore you with all of the scientific, very biological terms that are here, but to suffice it to say, we can use color coding, green, orange, and blue. And so what we always want to take away and sort of gauge in not only with ourselves, but when we work with students, where are our students at, is which color are they in? Where green is sort of like your optimal color, this is the color where all your hormones are normal, all your neurotransmitters are going well, you're eating healthy, digestion's good, resistance to infection is fine, you're resting, you're recuperating, you're ready to go and tackle the challenges of the day. Stress is sort of minimal here, it's functional, but it's not getting in the way. The orange area is really when we start talking about fight or flight. This is when anxiety is peaking and we're trying to do something about it. This is what drives students to do their homework. This is what drives everyone to go to work every day. This is the area that pushes us to success and really is the most active part of anxiety. Now, the problem here, or however, is that you can see clearly that this eventually goes up and peaks and kind of comes up into the blue. When you get up into the top end of this orange segment and up into the blue, that is when anxiety becomes extremely problematic. That is when individuals are running away from problems, individuals are becoming aggressive towards problems, or individuals are completely shutting down, disassociating from the problem, ignoring the problem, or even just reporting feeling numb or helpless. And these are situations where a student just doesn't have the capacity to seek help, to help themselves or do anything in that regard. And this is really the moments that as professionals and as faculty and instructors and staff that we have to focus as okay, this student is actually almost incapable of doing anything because they're overloaded. They're just overloaded. And I can talk to them for days, but they're not going to be able to do anything. And so we need to figure out how can we help students that find themselves in these freeze situations. So, and when we talk about student stress, we also talk about faculty. And so this is very important because we have a phenomenon in mental health known as vicarious trauma um, or any kind of vicarious experiencing that can occur just by being around people who are anxious or who have really just negative experiences or impacts on their lives. And so we have to recognize that as faculty, as staff, we're engaging with students who are experiencing heightened amounts of stress. We ourselves are experiencing stress. And so we have to recognize things that contribute to our own stress and how they may impact us on a day-to-day basis. And so, especially coming into COVID and now coming out of COVID mostly, we're looking at staffing issues in departments. People are doing far more work than they used to. We're talking about changing roles and job descriptions. Everyone is trying to do everything that they can, and which is an amazing thing for the students, but it is stressful for faculty. And when you're constantly going, you're kind of getting yourselves to the top ends of that orange line. And when something else comes in, you're freezing, we're freezing. We're having this moment of overload where we're like, okay, we've been doing so much. We've been trying to handle all these different roles, all these different changes around us. And now we're just frozen. We're like, okay, what's going to do next? What's going to happen next? And that's a normal response in a lot of the situations. And so I want everyone to sort of recognize that when you get there, it's okay to kind of get there. What's important is what we do to manage it and come back down. Um, and a lot of those are facilitated by this challenging student interactions, uncertainty of the learning environment. Are we going to be in campus, out of campus? I mean, we're just coming off of this for 2 years, right? Am I going back to work? Am I not coming back to work? Am I doing remote? Am I not doing remote? Am I coming on, off 2 weeks, not 2 weeks? It was really confusing. It was really chaotic. And it's that kind of instability that unfortunately does promote stress and it does promote anxiety as we try and figure things out because we just want some level of organization and consistency in our lives. And so we have to recognize that while students are dealing with a lot of stuff, faculty is as well. We are not living in a vacuum and we are not some vessel that is void of emotion that can handle everything as it comes to us without any feeling. And so this is going to be really important when we really start to look at what are students bringing into us and how can we respond in a way that is both manageable and helpful. Because that's another piece of this. We'd never want a faculty member or somebody else to impose on their own well-being in a way that is not going to be helpful to anyone. Because if we're not healthy, if we're not handling our stress and our fears, then it's not going to help any student who may also be going through some of these tensions. And so one of the main areas that I'm going to be focusing on during the rest of this presentation is the term crisis response and non-crisis, and what those two things look like and how we can kind of engage with them in a proactive way. And so NAMI in 2018 put out a very brilliant description of what a crisis is. And a crisis was defined as any situation in which a person's behavior puts them at risk of hurting themselves or others, or when they're not able to resolve the situation with skills and resources available. Um, Now, this is a very important thing, especially coming out of psych services and mental health, is we refer to crises in this manner of suicidality, homicidality, really this important and very powerful language. And so when we think about crises response, we're talking what's the worst that can happen in any given situation? What is actually going on with the student? And this is the time that is really, to be quite frank, very scary as a professional, as a teacher, as a facilitator, as somebody who has dealt with this. It's always scary when a student is in crisis because there's a very real danger that's present. Students who are saying, I'm suicidal. Okay, I need to save the student's life. What do I do? We kind of refer to this as an attenuating anxiety, which is like, oh, I have to act, I have to do something, I have to be proper in this matter, or else something bad's going to happen. And so we really want to focus on that notion of something bad's going to happen and how anxiety provoking a situation in with a student who is in crisis can be. And so when we look at people who are in crisis, the first thing that we really want to focus on is this term on the right, de-escalation. And so what is de-escalation? But it is a reduction in the level of conflict that is occurring with the individual. It is a generally less authoritative, less controlling, and a very much less confrontational approach that ultimately gives more control to other people that help the individual. And we use psychological, verbal, nonverbal techniques to guide communication and helping connect with people who are in crisis. And so this is where our own understanding of ourselves and our own stress levels become very important. Because if a student's in crisis and we're freezing up, no one's in control. And if no one's in control, the situation is just going to kind of spiral. And so we really need to have almost an ingrained sense of what is it we're going to be doing here and what is it that we can do going forward. And so really, when we're talking about crises, we're talking about imminent risk. And there's a lot of anxiety that is built up around what do we do with students who are in crises? And this is something that I can't sort of stress enough is an emergency. I have some information in the next coming slides that'll detail a timeline for you. But immediately, I want you to keep in mind that we have resources available on campus that are actually really prompt and really active, including things like the campus police, 911, and other various campus resources like psych services. But the biggest takeaway as we talk about crisis is risk. It's really about what do you do as a faculty member who experiences a student in crisis? And when that happens, there's often an initial fear, that freeze response that we talked about of, oh no, something really bad's going to happen. I have to act. I have to do something now. And yet there's also hesitation because of the seriousness of things like contacting campus police. And we don't typically like to jump to campus police as a mode of mental health services. But unfortunately, that's kind of where we are when it comes to these really serious responses. And so I do want to talk about why it's actually important to use the resources that we have and to even advocate going forward for student care. So this is a chart that was taken from a research study that talked about time prior to crisis that students thought about suicide. And so clearly, and this is the very important piece, less than or equal to 10 minutes is by far the highest part of this chart. What does this mean? This means that most students who end up in a serious suicidal crisis situation have only been considering it in about the past 10 minutes. And so this is a very acute thing. This isn't typically something people have been thinking about for days. This is probably as big of a surprise to them that they're experiencing it as it is to any instructor or facilitator who's dealing with it. Um, but it is a very quick thing that happens. Now, there are situations clearly denoted by the graph that show, hey, students do think about these things ahead of time, but it is generally a very quick process. I mean, even looking down, you can kind of see the bulk is within an hour. And so when we consider that most students sort of are escalating into crisis, 10, 30 minutes, then we ask, well, how long do people stay in crisis once they've peaked? And so the Harvard School of Public Health actually sought to answer this exact question because it's very important. And the bulk of it, less than an hour, less than 20 minutes. And so this is key. This is very, very important. Why is this so important? Because all you need to do as a professional, as a faculty, as a staff, is be present for 20 minutes, is to be there for 20 minutes. It's about not being controlling, not forcing students to do things, just being there. If you feel like there's an emergency where a student is, saying, hey, I am going to, commit suicide or commit homicide or something very major is coming up for a student, then you have those resources of campus PD, getting them involved, getting the students safe, because that's what this is about. This is about safety of everyone, right? Students, faculty, everyone. And so when you have students who are in acute crisis, you need to make sure that they are safe. The good news is typically if you immediately were to make a call to like campus police or something, and this is why I like this slide, by the time they get there in about 5 to 10 minutes, probably depending on exactly where you're at, the crisis will most likely be having already peaked and started to run its course, which means the student will be safe, you're going to be safe, and everything's going to be fine. There's really not a whole lot of crazy concern going on. In the event that it is one of those experiences that the crisis is continuing to escalate and getting worse. Now you have backup, and now you have somebody who is trained in dealing with mental health crisis situations and can contact more appropriate routes of people. And so I always like to highlight this because when I talk to individuals, when I talk to general people who don't necessarily have mental health training, we see a lot of misunderstanding of what exactly is a crisis and what does it how long does it actually last? How long, like, what is happening here? And the truth is sometimes just breathing for them and breathing for you is more than enough to get over the hump, to get to over the initial threat piece. What I have to really highlight though is that this is a time frame that it's extremely vital. Again, going back to that control, these students are feeling out of control. Forcing them, trying to impose upon them, trying to do anything other than just really being there, being present, and being supportive isn't always the best option. And so sometimes it is just saying, hey, I'm going to be here with you for the next 15 minutes as you relax and as you calm down, and giving yourself permission as a faculty member to do that and kind of not panic yourself. And it's okay to be anxious. It's okay to have, oh my God, this student's life is in danger, because you should be really concerned with safety. However, we also want to recognize that if you're able to say, you know what, I just need to be here and be present for 5 minutes while this student is in trouble and I need to make the proper phone calls, or I need to look to a colleague to help me out. These are very important steps to do to ensure the safety of the students and your colleagues. So, when we talk again about the escalation piece of a crisis situation and what its effects are on ourselves and our ability to even recognize it, this is a decent list of things that we can look at. Now, I also want to reflect back. Most students and most people in general don't spend weeks really contemplating what it would be leading up to a crisis. However, we do see signs that really come in and say, hey, this student is starting on that slope. Now, this is important. Not any one of these things here means a student is going to go into a crisis, just like not any one of these things here means a faculty member is going to have a breakdown. Um, you really do need to consider the entire picture. These are simply warning signs that we look at and say, hey, this is concerning. Maybe I can approach a student. And this is sort of that preventative measure, because we don't really want to get to a crisis because it is terrifying, it is scary, and it is the epitome of safety concern. And so when we're looking and working with student populations, things that we should look out for are students who weren't struggling academically starting to struggle. Students who maybe you see are social and very talkative, withdrawing. Students coming into class clearly having used alcohol or substances, or even if they're reporting it, right? And you know that they maybe didn't before. Lack of self-care. This is activities of daily living. This is things like brushing your teeth, brushing your hair, showering, bathing, stuff like that. But this is also things like taking time to de-stress, and go on walks. And so if you see students who you talk to and they're like, oh yeah, I have no time for myself ever, that's sort of like, okay, a warning sign. And you can encourage, hey, you should do that, you should spend some time doing something you like. What do you like? um Clearly things like major life stressors, breakups, deaths, stuff like that are always sort of, I think, the most obvious, and often things that sort of come to psych services are, hey, I had a student who experienced a death. Can they come in and talk to somebody? Of course, yes, definitely. And so that's like a fantastic response to get ahead of time, ahead of things. But there's also these other sections here. Change in perspectives. Is a student who is positive suddenly negative? Hopeless? Does a student feel like it's just out of their control? Their workload. Remember, we talked about workload. They just suddenly are like, I can't. I am overwhelmed. I actually can't do all my work. I can give you one assignment and that's it. Sorry. Um, their focus in class starts to switch. They report extreme mood swings, panic attacks in class. If a student is coming to class and then immediately running out because they're having a panic attack or an anxiety attack, these are very key warning signs that at this point, it's great to sort of approach and say, hey, here are some of the resources the campus offers. Not only just psych services, but also things like tutoring centers, career counselors, academic counselors. There's a lot of people on campus to help the students, and we need to make sure that we're utilizing them. And so, we're talking about the difference between crisis and non-crisis and self-care. And so that's sort of my brief rundown of a crisis. And so then sort of the actual follow over is, what is a not crisis situation? And so a not crisis situation is best described as a situation not involving direct suicidal ideation, not involving direct homicidality. Really, it's a panic attack. It's a client or a student who is extremely emotional, maybe stressed, maybe overwhelmed, maybe shutting down. But they're not an immediate threat to themselves. They're not an immediate threat to others, and they're not uh, unresponsive to those around them. And so in this case, it really is important, really, when you see these kinds of moments where a student is, okay, they're not an imminent threat to themselves, that sort of gives the permission to take time and say, okay, what can we do with the student? And so, here is a very interesting thing, which is just being with them. A lot of times when students are overwhelmed, especially in non-crisis, just having a teacher or a faculty member just kind of being like, hey, is everything all right? I can be with you for a second. If you want to talk, I'm here. That's really reassuring. You can, at these points, provide information on psych services, provide information on campus resources. And if you really are feeling that a student is, maybe you're seeing that escalation piece we just talked about, right? Maybe you're starting to see, what? I've been working with the student for a while. I'm going to take a deep breath. I'm going to recognize that their grades are slipping, that they're kind of acting different. And I'm just going to say, hey, do you feel like walking with me? I'm going to, we have psych services on campus. I want to walk you over there, kind of introduce you to them. So that way you just know where they are, who they are, and maybe they can help you with some of the stresses that are going on in your life. Even that act of saying, hey, can I do something for you, is all that's really needed to help students sometimes. We often think that we need grand gestures to help people who are struggling. But sometimes we just need to be people, and we just need to facilitate that basic level of human connection. And so, you know, as part of this as well, I like to talk a little bit about psych services, and this is a relatively quick presentation. But psych services offers a lot of services to our student bodies. We offer in-person services virtually as well as in person on all of our campuses. We offer group services throughout the year that vary depending on need, depending on attendance. We do our best to offer as many options as possible. And we also help test students for ADHD and anxiety and help them better understand maybe what's happening with them. And we do provide on-campus crisis management. And I do like to highlight the on-campus crisis management bit because we do have crisis on most of the campus's desks where students, clinicians are available all the time. But you don't want to rely on that as the go-to again, because if you try and force a student who is in crisis to go a place, maybe because you're thinking, oh, I have to do something right now, you risk kind of pushing the client or the student over the edge. And these are the situations when we really want maybe a consult. You can give us a call. We will often, especially in situations where we're like, we can't maybe get to you in time, or it's going to be a minute before we can get there, contact campus police, let them know what's going on, just being like, hey, this is the situation. So that way there's multiple people involved. And that's always the biggest takeaway with crises. The more people involved, the better, because that means the student has the best chances of receiving care and compassion in a way that's going to help them the best. And so we want to always make sure that when we're talking about mental health, we're talking about psychological services, that you can always call us. You can always rely on us, and you can always say, hey, this is happening. What do I do? Just be prepared that there will be lots of situations where, depending on emergency, depending on those suicidal, homicidal things, where there's going to be a lot you can do. as just a faculty with very little knowledge or understanding of the situation. You can quite literally just, again, being present with students helps de-escalate a lot. And so know that you have resources and that you're not alone as well in this process when we're dealing with a lot of students who are experiencing crisis or non-crisis symptoms, mental health struggles, anxiety attacks, panic attacks. It's finals week next week. If you're watching this, attending this live. And so I know I'm seeing a lot of clients coming in with increased levels of stress and anxiety, worry about their future, worried about what's going on. None of these students are at risk for suicide, but they are at risk for having just a mental breakdown because of the stress and worry that they're under. And again, I've talked to students who have just told me, you want to know what's made this better for me? You want to know what's made my week manageable? I have a professor who's there. I have a professor that offers, hey, I have this office hour, 30 minutes once a week where I go over bullet points from the lectures just to make sure my students got it. And so if you want to use that time, you can. There is just that attention to detail. And the students that I talk to love that. That is a piece that helps them manage themselves. It helps them keep from escalating. And that's very important. So the little self plug of psych services here. So you can, yep. So in the chat as well, this is the link to our website. You can take that, you can disseminate to students. There's QR codes floating around different buildings and campuses. We always ask, again, just giving students our information, and then we can help them from there as well. Massively helpful. And something that very often doesn't get utilized enough. We want to be there, we want to help, and we can't do that if students don't seek us out, because no one can force an adult to do something. But if they have the option and they have the access, then they know that they're not alone, and then they know that they can be heard. And again, that's just that being present, caring enough to say, hey, have you thought about this? Is this something you could consider? Before we get anywhere near a point where this student is actually having a panic attack in your class, there's probably a moment where you can stop and go, let me offer this, even as a blanket statement. I know some professors who do that. They blanket statement, hand out our flyers at the start of a semester. Just like, hey, here it is. If you need services, it's here. And they talk about it. And I've talked to those professors, and they said that the students are really receptive to this method, where they do talk about it. And we do see students come in who are like, yeah, oh yeah, this professor told me I should come over here. And it's like, awesome, fantastic. Let's see what's going on. And so just that encouragement, just that being there and that support of the student. Again, I can't really emphasize that enough. It's just that support is so valuable in the student body. And when you're doing that and you're being present and you're being supportive, it reduces the chance for those risks. It reduces the chance for those crises, for those escalations, which takes a little bit off of your plate as well, and our plates, of the moments of risk where people are entering those realms of hopelessness and suicidality and homicidality, which we don't want to be in because someone's life is in danger. And so taking preemptive measures and taking preemptive steps are huge. And so use resources. So this is the part of the presentation that I like. If I had all day, we would go through a lot of this together, but we don't, and that's okay. And so these are self-regulation strategies and exercises that are commonly used to help individuals who are overstimulated. And so here we have a few techniques, and I'm going to go through them briefly. So things like guided meditation. For anyone who has done this, it's a fantastic tool. If you've never done it, I advise you to kind of look it up. Guided meditation videos on YouTube are very popular, and so you can find them pretty easily. And the best part is they require you to say nothing, and they just require you to have a laptop or a computer. And so if you do have access to a video or even a phone, and a student is in a situation where maybe they are overwhelmed, putting on a video of these video assisted guided meditations, which usually combine beautiful scenery, amazing auditory stimulations like birds and waters and waves, combined with somebody walking you through a meditation exercise, naturally promotes relaxation in the body. and you as a faculty member have to do nothing other than sit with them and watch. Um, and so that's something that's actually a very easy skill to just do. It's just to be there and be like, hey, let's watch this together. Um, if you can't do that, sitting in silence, intentionally sitting in silence. Your physical presence is, again, this is always going to be my go-to. Is just be there. It doesn't. You don't have to say anything. You don't have to be a savior. You don't have to rescue. You just have to be. And even doing that, intentionally sitting there in silence, waiting for the student to respond to you. And again, no pressure. There's no pressure on the student. You're not exerting any direct control, no direct influence to cause them to become overstimulated more. You're just saying in a silent way, you're okay. I'm here when you need me. Another thing to potentially look up, again, if I had more time, I would probably walk you through this, but progressive muscle relaxation is a scientifically backed relaxation technique that focuses on tensing and relaxing muscles. It's based in science in the fact that when we're anxious and we're stressed, you remember that high orange, low blue, our muscles are filled with various chemicals, neurotransmitters, and the like that stress out our muscles and basically get them ready to act. We don't live in a day and age where that's always possible. And so we're not always running full force as fast as our legs can carry us for miles on end. And we're definitely not always fighting anyone that comes near us. And so these chemicals end up in our body and they end up there for way longer than they should. And they actually break down muscle. That's why muscle soreness is a common side effect of anxiety. Progressive muscle relaxation helps the body trick itself into thinking it just ran a mile. And by doing that, it then causes all those chemicals to go away, improving muscle relaxation, improving mental states. And so this is another one that I would recommend people check out because in addition to being able to do it and provide it as information for students, it's also really good to do by yourself and you can do it pretty much anywhere you want without anyone noticing. And that's the brilliant part about it is I could do it right now. You could do it right now. No one would know. No one would care. And so because of that, it lets you do this de-stress activity at any point during the day, especially when you are stressed. Keeping on with the activities, breathing, it's a cliche one, but it's a good one. Breathing triggers parts of our nervous system that like to produce calming effects. And so I listed two here, which is 4-7-9 breathing and alternate nostril breathing. One is a breathing technique developed by a doctor. The other is a yoga technique. These are things that, again, I encourage people to look up on your own and find videos because they help focus the mind on something other than the internal sensations of anxiety. And with practice, they condition the body to be more relaxed. And they're a great point to start any kind of activity that's stressful. And they're a great position to springboard self-care off of. And so again, all of these things you can kind of find videos on it. YouTube's amazing. And so I definitely encourage that. Now, something that you can do in the moment with no videos, without any information at all with any student is grounding. Grounding is a technique that puts a student back into the here and now. And so what this looks like is a few examples. Name 3 objects you see, name 3 objects you hear, name 3 things you can smell right now, and tell me what you can taste. Really cueing into the senses of an individual student. You can't have a panic attack if you're trying to figure out some different things. I like things like what building are you in campus right now? What room? What wing? Name 3 teachers. Always great. Something I tell students all the time is rubber bands are great to have on your wrists when you're having an anxiety attack. A great grounding thing that says, "Hey, I'm here. I'm real." You snap yourself with a rubber band. It sort of starts the system over and it says, "Hey, wait a second. I am here. I am real. I am alive, and I'm not just my anxiety, and I'm not just this panics that I'm feeling." And those are very simple, very easy things that help people. Um, and you can do it yourselves. You can do it with anyone having an anxiety attack. And I encourage you again to take time on your own to really take a look at these things. You can also reach out to psych services, and we can dedicate time to maybe coming out to a classroom to help walk through a class or through a group of instructors these techniques in person or remotely via Zoom, in a more detailed way where we can focus specifically on what each of these things do. But if that's something that you would like, please reach out to us, and we can talk. Let's see here. So, as part of the little bit of a faculty focus here, we were encouraged to remind everyone that you do have EAP therapy benefits for your own mental health and self care. While that isn't covered through the school itself, like through our psychological services department, the school EAP benefits does offer 8 to 10 sessions of therapy for all employees, completely covered, which is a really high amount. Most places only really offer like 5, and so use that. That's amazing. That's really good. It's a lot, and it's just one of those other things that when we engage in our own self-care, we are better people to help others, especially in the time right now that we are there. Yep, and use the Q&A. I know Susie just put that in there, and I do go through this pretty quick. We are limited in time in many ways, but I am doing my best to leave about 15 minutes at the end for questions. So if you have them, please give them to me, or else I'm going to sit in silence for way too long. Because that's it. We're at the 12:45. And so there are resources at the end of this slide as well for some of the statistics that I cited. And so I do want to open up the last 15 minutes of this to people to ask questions and to have discussion. Again, a lot of this information is very brief, it's very quick. But the big takeaways that I hope people do get from this is that there are things that you can do for not only yourself, but for students to better manage your own fears, your own anxiety, your own stress in a context of student care and expectations. And so that way we can all work as a cohesive group to support everyone, each other, in what is a chaotic time. And Susie has enabled raised hand features, in which they can unmute you if you wish to ask a verbal question. That's a new fancy one. Everyone's good. Everyone got it. That's what I like to hear. Okay, so we do have an anonymous question, which is, you mentioned to call campus PD if a student is in crisis. Are campus PD trained to handle situations like this? Yes, they are. So one of the things that I'll say, and this will be completely honest, is about 90% of campus PD is really amazing. I've had fantastic relations with most of them there. They are all trained. They all undergo mandatory mental health training. The ones that I've worked with have been phenomenal. I've utilized Campus PD with students who have stormed out of the clinic in an emotional state where I was not comfortable with where they were because they had expressed things like suicidality to me before. An officer showed up within 10, 15 minutes, was there. They talked with the student, and it was this really powerful moment of just, hey, I'm just making sure you're okay. And this is the part about that escalation that's very important. Whereas I knew the student was escalated, I didn't know if the student was going to continue to escalate. I needed somebody to have eyes on the student when I couldn't in about a 15-minute time frame. They did it. They came. The student was like, you know what? I'm good. I was overwhelmed. We're straight. I think one individual last year had to be hospitalized for suicidality. And in that case, again, that's one of those situations where if that student was just let to go without anybody talking to that student, it could have been worse. So yes, Campus PD is trained, and they are given resources to manage and handle crises. And I guess I'll also kind of say this in relationship to the last question, since no one else is saying anything. It did, I did recently see a advertisement for a new bill that was being looked at to be approved for California, which actually allocated funds for mental health emergency response teams, so that we no longer had to rely explicitly on police departments. And so that might also be something that might be coming around soon. We might be hearing more about that soon. And so that's just also something that could be looked out for going forward as a better alternative to PD, but we have to use what we have. And always remember, you have the power. You just have to be okay with it. All right, we're wrapping it up. Thank you everyone for who came in and attended this webinar with us today in person. If you leave and you didn't ask a question, but you decide you want to ask a question, feel free to reach out to any psych services department at any of the campuses, and we will gladly assist, help you out, answer any questions you got. Utilize us. We're here for a reason. Thank you, everyone.